So what are the president's impeachment and re-election prospects and strategies exactly? And how does he plan to execute them? Well, my guest this week is the ideal person to ask. She's Kellyanne Conway, the White House counselor and close advisor to Mr. Trump, and she joins me from the White House. Kellyanne, thank you very much for being here.
It's an absolute pleasure, Jerry. Thank you for having me.
Let me start, if I may. Various news organizations reported this week, including the Wall Street Journal, that President Trump wanted his Attorney General, William Barr, to publicly declare that the president hadn't broken any laws in his phone call with Ukrainian President Zelensky. Do you know why William Barr refused to do that?
Well, the president has denied that reporting whatsoever. And the fact is, the Department of Justice had already weighed in. There are articles dated September 25th, for example, that clearly state the Department of Justice Criminal Division looked into this and declined to investigate further because they concluded that no campaign finance violation had occurred. So the Department of Justice had already put out a very clear and compelling statement as to what they assessed this call to mean and not to mean. Also, it was Attorney General Barr, along with their White House counsel and the president himself, who decided to release the transcript. The entire world has access to the contents of that call now between the Ukrainian and American presidents.
But just to be clear, so there was no discussion of William Barr doing a press conference, coming out and saying very publicly the president broke no laws in that phone call?
I have no direct knowledge of that, no personal knowledge of that. All I know is that the president has denied it through a series of tweets and through other private statements. And I also think that reporting is a little odd only because the Department of Justice under Attorney General Barr had already indeed publicly stated that they saw no campaign finance violation, no criminal conduct that would rise to the level of a Department of Justice investigation. So the reporting that suggests the president wanted the Attorney General and DOJ to do something is something the DOJ had already done.
Let's move on to Ambassador Sondland's remarks this week, his revised statement that, in fact, despite what he'd earlier said, he did understand, he did presume, was the phrase he used, that there was a quid pro quo connecting the release of aid from the United States to Ukraine with the Ukraine government's willingness to conduct and publicly state they were conducting investigations. So he says there was a quid pro quo. You and the president continue to say there wasn't. It does look like there was one, doesn't it?
No. So what Ambassador Sondland said originally in page 105 and 106 of his transcript sworn testimony is that he called the president and asked him directly, quote, what is it you want from Ukraine? And the president said, I want them to do what they ran on. In other words, I want them to root out corruption and show that they're doing that. There is no quid pro quo. Ambassador Sondland has since corrected his testimony, I guess, or added to it. But to this moment, Jerry, Sondland admits that he presumed. He has no direct knowledge. He's just guessing. Another witness said their interpretation of the call was this. Somebody else said, I just assumed that. We cannot impeach a president of the United States based on what staffers or ambassadors or any of us presume, interpret, wish, hope, think, imply, intuit. The Constitution provides for high crimes and misdemeanors before we do the extraordinary event of impeaching a president and removing him from office, particularly when he was democratically elected over 3 years ago and will be again in less than a year.
I'm a little puzzled, though, Kellyanne, because you say, again, there was no quid pro quo, but you also say that the president, and the president has said this, and others have too, the president was very keen, that the whole point of this was to root out corruption, that he really wanted to go after corruption in Ukraine, and he wanted them to do it. What would be wrong? Why would there be anything wrong with the president saying, you need to root out corruption? If you don't root out corruption, we're not going to do what we've said we will do because we need that from you. Governments do that all the time. They say, if you want the aid, then we're going to have to require you to do this. Why the refusal to acknowledge that there was a quid pro quo?
Well, but remember, everybody's using the phrase quid pro quo to try to build a case for impeachment. Adam Schiff, when he's not lying and leaking and cherry-picking 10 minutes worth of 10 hours of an interview subject's deposition, is talking about quid pro quo is the road that leads to impeachment. So we're not going to use their language. You are absolutely correct that governments, including the U.S. government, condition foreign aid and military aid on any number of factors. Every administration does that. That is correct. What the president is saying here is that Ukraine got its aid. It has $400 million worth of military aid that one presumes, Jerry, Ukraine is using as you and I speak right now. The Ukrainian president said he had no idea aid was being held up. He said he felt no pressure. And in fact, this is much more aid than Ukraine ever got under the Obama administration. Basically, they were sending pillows and blankets. This president has given them $400 million worth of military aid that they're using. And what you just said, though, about, well, even if there was a quid pro quo, why would it matter? This happens all the time. This is something that it's reported a number of Republican senators are saying, which is, I don't know if I have to assess one way or the other if the aid was conditioned, but I certainly don't think it rises to the level of impeachable offense. That may be one of the many reasons why, Jerry, that last week, not a single Republican, not one Republican, in fact, 2 Democrats agreed with all the Republicans to not allow the impeachment inquiry to go forth, because based on what they know from these secret hearings, there's nothing that they see that rises to the level of a high crime or misdemeanor.
Right, but this is what, again, puzzles me. What's the defense here? Exactly as you said, some Republicans are saying, look, the president did say that this needed to be done, and if they didn't do it, they weren't going to get the aid. That's perfectly fine. He was going after corruption. But then they also, you say, and others say, well, actually, there wasn't even that condition there. It's a confusing message, isn't it? Either there was a condition which you were able to do, or there wasn't, in which case, then why were you even discussing, why are we even discussing the idea that aid should be withheld?
Well, I think, first of all, why are we discussing impeachment is the real central question here. Why in the world is the Congress not doing its job to keep this economy humming, to help us lower prescription drug prices, to get an infrastructure package going, 5G, rural broadband, surface transportation, get our air traffic control system into the 21st century, for God's sake? It was built for a time when we had 100,000 annual passengers. We now have close to 1 billion. We can't get them to the table here at the White House, Jerry, and stay without huffing and puffing, throwing their arms up and walking out on the people's business. So the real central question is, why do we have an impeachment inquiry? To your question of, is it a confusing message? No. If the president were actually afforded due process rights, and if this were an accountable, transparent, open process that you or I would be afforded as citizens in this country, if we were being accused of a crime or even in a civil matter, we would be able to present witnesses, to challenge their witnesses, to present evidence. So the president would argue in the alternative. He would say there's no quid pro quo, but if there was, it isn't impeachable. But guess who bears the burden here?
I've got to stop
Not us. The people who want to impeach him. They bear the burden.
I understand. You made your point. I'm sorry. We've got to take a quick break. Please stay with us. I want to discuss next the role that the president's personal attorney, Rudy Giuliani, has been playing in all this. Stay with us. I'm with White House Counsellor Kellyanne Conway. Kellyanne, thank you again. Can I talk about Rudolph Giuliani? He clearly played an important role in the president's outreach, if you like, to Ukraine and to the relationship with Ukraine. And he was operating, one former ambassador said this week that the State Department, the officials had a Giuliani problem. Can you tell me, can you clear up for us exactly what his role was? Was there any relationship at all between what Rudy Giuliani was doing and the Trump 2020 re-election campaign? Was there any connection? Was there any financial connection? Was there any organizational connection?
I'm not sure what Mayor Giuliani was doing in the Ukraine all along, but I know that he has spoken for himself, and I would refer you to his comments. And most recently, Mayor Giuliani reminded everyone that he is the president's personal attorney, and he was representing him in that capacity for quite a while. Remember, the July 25th call between the American president and the Ukrainian president occurred one short day after Bob Mueller testified to Congress, which wasn't a bombshell, it was a big bomb. And the sequel was as bad as the original. A Mueller report comes out in March. Then Bob Mueller testifies on July 24th. One day later, Jerry, the president of the United States, Donald Trump, it has that on his mind, is thinking, well, hold on. I want to ask the Ukrainian president about 2016. I want to get to the bottom of it now. He mentions CrowdStrike, 2016. And then he says, and I think Zelensky may be the first to mention Rudy. I don't remember right now. But more importantly, it's Zelensky who talks about Macron and Merkel not helping. The United States is helpful. Sure. And it is the Ukrainian president, Zelensky, who says to President Trump, I learned a lot from you. I'm trying to drain the swamp. I'm trying to root out corruption. I'm going to do that. But
Giuliani was also had business interests in Ukraine. We know this now. This has been widely reported. So he was operating. He had business interests, presumably financial interests, and at the same time he was representing the president. So isn't there a conflict of interest there? And I'm wondering what sort of efforts were made to ensure that that conflict of interest was dealt with. Because on the one hand, he's going to Ukraine representing the President of the United States, the most important person on the planet, and at the same time, he's also got some business interests there. That sounds like a conflict of interest.
I would need to refer those questions directly to Rudy Giuliani because only he can answer them. But I will say this. I am really struck by how much the mainstream media are trying to stretch their necks out and say, and we must remind our viewers and our listeners, there's no evidence that Hunter or Joe Biden has done anything wrong, anything illegal, and yet we're presumptively negative and presumptively looking for criminal conduct among Donald Trump and Rudy Giuliani and anybody connected with the President of the United States. It's truly offensive, respectfully, that they're all doing that. And while we're on the subject of the Bidens, they're like the Loch Ness monsters of the swamp. Hunter Biden admitted to ABC News last month, Jerry, that he had no energy experience. Joe Biden has no energy whatsoever, but his son had no energy experience that would qualify him to have a $50,000 a month retainer from Burisma, this energy company in Ukraine, and then move on to China and apparently get even more money out of it. And that, but for his last name, he probably couldn't have gotten that contract. It's not just his last name. It's that at the time that he got a seat on the board of an energy company in Ukraine, his father was vice president of the United States, who had Ukraine in his portfolio.
I'm glad you raised the Biden.
How is this not relevant?
Well, it is absolutely relevant. I'm glad to hear it. But what's particularly relevant, seems to me, is it sounds rather similar to the position that Giuliani found himself in. The irony here is it wasn't Giuliani.
He's not the vice president of the United States.
Giuliani was representing the president of the United States, and the allegation. There is just the reasonable suspicion is that maybe as he was representing such a powerful person, the president, he was also doing business in Ukraine in much the same way that Biden and his son were doing.
Dealings. Well, no, I think you cannot conflate the two at all, and here's why. Joe Biden was vice president of the United States at that time. He was in charge of Ukrainian policy. Then he allowed his son, with zero experience and frankly right to be there, on Air Force Two as it pulled into as it flew to China. This is exactly what bothers people about the swamp. What bothers people about political gamesmanship is precisely part of why Donald Trump won in the first place. And when people say, well, why are you talking about the Bidens? Because Joe Biden is on videotape in January 2018 bragging in front of the Council on Foreign Relations that he was holding up $1 billion worth of funding guarantees to the Ukrainians until they agreed to fire a prosecutor, until they agreed to not investigate. And he bragged, if you don't believe me, call Barack. I'm on the tarmac for 90 more minutes.
Hate to interrupt you again, Kellyanne, but let's take another very quick break and we'll be right back. And I want to get your thoughts on the 2020 campaign, especially in the light of this week's elections. Stay with us. My guest is Kellyanne Conway. Kellyanne, this week's off-year elections continued a trend that we've seen now in 17 and 18, now 19, of the Republicans losing support, significant support in suburbs of major cities, in places like Virginia and Pennsylvania and Kentucky as well. I'm wondering, with a year to go to the election, what are you going to do to reverse that trend?
Make sure that people know what the progress report of this president and his administration really are. And that includes, obviously, a historic economy by modern standards of low unemployment rates, particularly among African Americans, Asian Americans, Hispanic Americans, women. But also the wage growth among blue-collar workers has been pretty significant. And the job production alone, bringing these industries back to this country, literally, Jerry, that were flat on their backs, manufacturing, warehousing, mining, construction, for example. The fundamentals of the economy are very strong. I think this is an economy that works for job creators, job seekers, and job holders. I think the left is offering free stuff, and this president's offering freedom. You have a great deal of opportunity now just to not have job security or job availability, but job mobility. You can choose a job closer to home if you want less of a commute. You can choose a job that offers eye and dental. But I think it's really cutting through the noise and the lies. Right. And the screeds, the epithets that are thrown at the president and his party, and making sure that the message out. I also think with President Trump on the ballot in 2020, a lot of those suburbs will come back to him.
Well, let me ask
the party.
Latest Wall Street Journal NBC poll. A lot of these voters in these suburban areas are white, college-educated women. The latest Wall Street Journal NBC poll last month said that President Trump's approval rating with white, college-educated women is 34%. That's a number that's way below where it was, by the way, in 2016. That's a lot of people say the problem here. You've said you blame the media and the failure to get the message across, but a lot of people say the problem is the president's tone. That those people in particular really object to some of the things the president says and tweets and does. Is that going to change?
Just to clarify, I'm not blaming the media. I'm saying that we have to make sure that the message that the people are hearing about the president's progress report for them specifically is the one that's cutting through the noise or the silence and being associated back with the president. So I tell people all the time, you don't like the tone, you don't like this tweet or that tweet, that's great. I don't agree with anybody 100% of the time. but I certainly will gravitate towards people who I think have my best interest at heart. And this is a president who for 3 consecutive years has made sure our military has had more than $700 billion for each of those 3 years. Our military now, our veterans, have the respect and the resources that they deserve.
Very, very quickly, do you accept that this 3-year trend does demonstrate that Republicans, most importantly the president, have a problem in the suburbs in this country?
I think that the suburban voters will have to look at who's better on health care, the economy, the military, the drug crisis, things that hit really close to home, and that we will have the resources, and most importantly, President Trump and Vice President Pence out there and others delivering that message. And I take it all seriously. I'm not dismissive of it all. I will tell you, though, there were a lot of good spots for the Republican Party and the president. 13 of the 14 elections in Mississippi and Kentucky on last Tuesday went Republican. Bevin came really close. The president himself made that race competitive. We have the first African-American ever independently elected in Kentucky. We have the first woman ever elected Mississippi Attorney General.
Right. If the president's struggling in Mississippi, though, Kellyanne, then you got. I mean, we're talking Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, those kind of places, aren't we?
I like the fact that in your neighboring New Jersey, Republicans did fairly well. We picked up a couple assembly seats, and one of the 2 Democrats who voted with Republicans to not go forward with the impeachment inquiry is a Democratic freshman congressman from New Jersey. He hears from his constituents, get down to the business, get that trade deal, get USMCA voted on, keep this economy humming, and stop trying to investigate and impeach a president into oblivion. You want to beat President Trump, beat him at the ballot box.
As ever, thank you once again. Thank you very much indeed for joining us.